showing you, and I'm going to repeat this, are not using the technique that we're going to be using. Okay, I'm going to repeat it. They're not using the technique that we're going to be using. But they are kind of examples of architectural interiors throughout art history, using a variety of techniques, some similar, some completely different. The technique that we're going to use is a combination technique. And it's going to start off as a direct painting in black and white only. So we're going to do the whole painting in black and white, just like we did with painting number 1. That's part 1, which is what we're going to be working on today and through the weekend. Part 2 is what's called indirect painting. So up until this point, we've been doing direct painting. Now we're going to do indirect painting. And that's why the medium that we used last time to re-wet so that we could do alla prima, right? The medium is now going to be used for what we call a glazing medium. So we're going to do this black and white underpainting, alla prima style, direct. And then on top of that, we're going to lay glazes. And what we painted underneath is going to shine through those glazes. So it's kind of like when you put on sunglasses. Everything in the world shines through those sunglasses, right? And if your sunglasses are color, they're going to tint everything in the world with that color. So if you've got blue sunglasses, everything's going to look bluish. If you've got pink sunglasses, everything's going to look pink. If you have rose-colored glasses, you're going to think life is great, and it'll look rosy, right? But the main thing that we want to concern ourselves with now is, number 1, did we pick a good interior? Number 2, do we remember how to paint black and white and how simple that was compared to what we've come to do, right? So that idea of black and white painting is where we're returning to. And number 3, are we going to follow these historical examples as inspiration? So I just wanted to show you a couple of them. So I'm going to play from current slide. So the first one for our Dreamy dwelling project is Edouard Vuillard, and he would be late 19th, early 20th century, so kind of riding from the Impressionist, post-Impressionist movement into the Fauvist movement. So, you know, he's right on the cusp of modernism. And most of his work deals with color, for one thing, but subject matter-wise, interior, domestic interior is what he was always painting. And he especially loved color and pattern. And I think you can tell in this painting that pattern is like, that's the main subject matter. The people don't even matter, really. I mean, they're there, but really it's about those patterns and the color temperatures. So you know how, you know, back here there's bright color, but it's all desaturated, just like in atmospheric perspective. And then as you come forward, the colors become brighter and more saturated. Or if he seeks to call your attention to these figures, he puts brighter, more intense colors on them. Now, this would be a direct painting. So this is much more similar to what we were doing in our atmospheric perspective painting. So alla prima, wet into wet. The beauty of Vuillard's paintings, which is just crazy, I saw a show of his probably 12 years ago at the National Gallery, is all his paintings are like this big, and they're on cardboard, just like cheap paper cardboard. But they're very beautiful. Here's another one. They're also very simplified, as you can see. This one's much more brush strokey versus this one, which is much more flat color. But again, look at all of the temperature variation and color variation, intense colors towards the foreground, muted colors towards the background. Elizabeth, or sorry, not Elizabeth, Olivia, this reminds me of that one painting that you did that you were trying to get that kind of dusky rose color, remember? Versus the color that you were getting, which was like this. So again, you can see how color intensity as well as value variation really pushes the foreground forward and pulls the background backwards. But I mean, even look at these walls here and how gray they are. But also, you know, they're kind of like violety grays up here versus the yellowy whites and grays in the wall. So there's a complementary relationship. Another part of Vuillard that I really like is the quiet darkness of the interior space versus the light of the exterior space. So that kind of intimate, you know, all the lights, of course, they had gas lamps at this point in time, not electric lights, but all the lights on the interior are off, and the light that's in the space is just coming from the exterior, so that ambient light. And I just want you to look at how, you know, how much depth there is, and how, I mean, it's not naturalism per se, but a naturalist painter, someone who is very realistic, would go through a stage in his painting that looks like this on the way to naturalism. See, the difference between the Impressionist or the Post-Impressionist or the early Modernist is not that they couldn't paint like the naturalists that preceded them. It's that they stopped short in the process because they didn't need to paint like the naturalists that preceded them because photography existed. So what's the point in wasting your time in doing something photographically realistic if the photographer can do it faster, cheaper, better, more efficiently, right? So how does we, as painters, make painting relevant in an era when painting's purpose has been superseded by the camera? Does that make sense with everybody?
Because it's fun?
Huh?
Because it's fun?
Well, and that too. That too. But, you know, looking at, you know, this palette of blue and gray versus the lit blue and gray, and the intensity of the white and the blue there versus the lack of intensity in this backlit wall is what creates a sense of light and shadow. Pierre Bonnard was a contemporary, worked a little bit later than Vuillard, but was very influenced by Vuillard, and his work took what Vuillard did and like turned up the intensity times 10. So Bonnard is known as one of the greatest of the colorists of the early 20th century. You know, he would have been influenced by Matisse. He would have been roughly contemporary with Matisse. But same kind of subject matter. Pattern, interior versus exterior, and dramatic color variation. This is not actually a painting by Bonnard, and I realized it only after I put the slideshow together that somebody collaged cats on top of it. So ignore that. On to Matisse. Of course, he simplified even more. So just flat planes of color. But still, there's a sense of depth and a sense of color contrast that creates a sense of inside, outside, light versus dark. And when I say light versus dark, I don't mean color. I mean, there is color, light versus dark, but a lit exterior versus a dark interior. Does that make sense? And pattern. But again, you know, like underneath a Vuillard is a Matisse. So it's weird that it was like a reversal towards simplification. Whereas Vuillard would have been much more close to a naturalist, like a farther advanced stage. Bonnard would have been a little bit farther away and Matisse would be even farther. And of course, Matisse was all about simplification, simplification, simplification. Flat color, not a lot of texture, not a lot of detail. Everything is reduced. And of course, it's not because he couldn't paint realistically, it's because he wanted to create an art that was simple, because he wanted to communicate beauty in simplicity. So by reducing everything to very simple shapes, he was achieving that. Simple colors, he was achieving that. But again, this could be the beginning stages of a more advanced, more naturalistic painting. Does that make sense to everybody? I want you to hold that in your head, because our tendency is to like, okay, paint, paint, paint till this is realistic. Okay, simple, paint, 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 paint until this is realistic. And we do that like all over instead of treating the whole thing simply and then laying another layer of detail and information on top, and then another layer of information and detail on top. All right, so now we move into the mid 20th century, and we have artists like Edward Hopper, who kind of now, if Matisse is like the stopping point of simplicity, Edward Hopper goes back and finds a middle ground between the severe simplicity of Matisse and a more naturalistic kind of approach that would have been pre-impressionist. So finding kind of a middle ground between those two things. So you have, you know, gradation of color, for instance, and modeling of light and shadow to create cylindrical shapes, things like that, that you didn't see in Matisse, right? If we go back, you know, there's no modeling of tone here. It's all just flat color. No gradation. Versus this, which has that gradation. But underneath this would be something like this. That's the point I'm trying to make. Now, the difference between Matisse and Hopper is that Hopper did use an indirect painting method, which is closer to what we're going to be doing. He didn't start with black and white. That's the main difference. But he did do kind of a tonal underpainting, which was a kind of sienna color, like what you're seeing here in the curtains and in some of the undertones of the figure. I think you can see it as well. But then he built up light and shadow with opaque color and transparent color on top of that. And again, you know, I want you to note, you know, a similar treatment of space as far as linear perspective and the kind of geometric predominance of the interior space, the inside outside, and then this human figure that's like the organic counterpoint to this abundance of geometric form. Does that make sense? I think his paintings are so perfect to express the kind of existential loneliness of the Depression era leading up into World War II and just after. So this kind of confusion that happened with the shift of the pre-industrial kind of 19th century, well, of course, industrialism really started in the 19th century, but it was in full swing by the time you get in the 20th century. And all of a sudden, the wide-eyed hopefulness that people had with technology was countered by the horrors of World War I and World War II and pollution and tenement housing and child labor and all of this stuff. But again, I want you to notice, especially in areas like this, what you're seeing, that glow that's underneath, that's kind of that sienna color. You can see it everywhere, including in her hair, in the curtains. That's underneath layers of opaque and transparent color. Okay, so there's like a brown and white tonal map. We're going to do a black and white tonal map underneath. We'll do a brown and white later. But again, I want you to notice the color variation everywhere. Temperature variation. And the abstractness. You know, he's not going in there and fussing, about smoothing everything out. Again, you can see the brown underneath, 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 and then all of these colors kind of built up in layers on top of more opaque and transparent colors, okay? So this idea of creating a tonal map underneath with direct painting and then layering indirectly on top of that underpainting is what we're going to be going for in this project, okay? The flapper, love those hats. Josie, you need a hat like that. I think you look sharp, especially with the fanny pack. I mean, it's just like totally perfect. Of course, Richard Diebenkorn kind of goes back to Matisse. So if Matisse is very simple and Edward Hopper is closer to naturalism, then Diebenkorn is like in the middle of those two. So he's taking a step back. But again, do you notice that's, that sienna underpainting that's underneath? So that idea of layering both opaque in the beginning and then indirect and opaque on top so that the preceding layers are seen through the layers that come later is really important in both Diebenkorn and Edward Hopper's process. But I mean, you have to admit, as rough as this looks, it looks a lot better than a naive painter's attempt at trying to paint realistically. Do you follow what I mean? Does that make sense? I mean, it makes you feel bad for trying so hard sometimes. Because if you can achieve such good results with that kind of looseness of application, then why are we trying so hard? Why are we trained and hardwired to try to make everything so perfect? Now, you may want to go farther than that and, you know, clean up all of the edges of this chair and make that perfectly straight and, you know, not have the green on top of this wedge of cheese and, you know, behind. I mean, you may want to do all that, but does he need to? I mean, is that where I went, oh my gosh, that green's on top of that wedge of cheese? No, it didn't bother you at all. And like Hopper, you know, that solitary figure in an environment is very important. And, you know, it's funny because as you start to look at this, this reminds me of like a Rothko painting. You guys know who Mark Rothko is, right? Hello. There we go. All right. Like a Rothko painting. Okay, that's funny. Apparently this person doesn't like Mark Rothko at all. But I mean, you know, I mean, that reminds me of that background, you know, the painterliness of it, right? Okay. All right, so just to get you guys who are on the internet started so that I can help these guys get their canvases built, I'm just going to show everybody this real quick video. Not that one. No. Where did it go? So this is the interior that I'm painting. And then well, where did it go? Okay. I'm sorry, Clarissa. I'm trying. Oh, here it is. All right, so first, all we need is a palette of black and white. Now, I changed my image a little bit because I wanted to do a portrait instead of a landscape. So I cropped in a little bit and made it a square, but you'll see that I shifted some stuff around. All right, so I've got my palette there. I've got black and white, just like we started off with. And I start by sketching with my black, just like we started our first painting with. So just a little bit of water to make it fluid. And using, of course, linear perspective and measuring those angles with my brush so that everything goes to the vanishing point, right? So the vanishing point for this one would be probably somewhere off to the side, and the vanishing point for this one would probably be somewhere off to the side of the image. So I was stuck just using my brush to measure those angles and replicate them on the canvas, right? So once I've got the underdrawing in black and white, then I start mixing up my paint. So I noticed that the ceiling is kind of a gray tone. And of course, the wall beside it is a darker gray, and the brick wall is even darker. So I'm basically, you can see I've just got a grayscale here. Now notice that I'm putting black behind those railings. Why? So that I can paint the railings on top. Yay, we've learned that lesson, right? Always paint what behind on top. I'm not getting involved with a lot of detail as far as the cars and the flowers in the bottle. I'll do that later. So I'm just basically painting a flat tonal map of gray. And I'm keeping it very loose and relatively flat. There's a little bit of gradation happening, and there'll be a little bit of texture happening, but for the most part, it's incidental. It's just me painting directly and things are blending in together, okay? So the first step, and you can see there, notice that I painted the rug really dark. And the reason I did that is the same reason I painted black behind the railings. And that is because when I paint white into that, I can kind of dab, 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 and you can see that gives me a texture. Does that make sense? As opposed to trying to paint the black in between. So the only thing I didn't get to in this part of the demonstration was the chair. There's obviously some things that need to be cleaned up, like the edge of this. I need to push some of the darks that are underneath things, so forth and so on. But for the most part, you know, this is what everyone should have as that first layer, okay? Do you guys online understand?
Yeah.
Okay. Huh? Yes, everybody understands? Olivia?
Yes.
Sophia?
Yes.
Okay, so you guys get started, and I'm going to tell them how to make canvas and bring up the picture. So there you got the picture side by side with the screen. And really, since you're only using two colors, you don't even really need water. No, it won't hurt you to have a little bit thin stuff out. Okay. You all right? Okay. So now that this painting surface is kind of dried, I can get in there with black or blacks, like underneath this table, and they'll stand out more. I can see a little bit of a reflection, so I can scumble in some of that reflection there. Obviously, I can see some black lines. Around the periphery of the mirror table. So I can go ahead and add those in. I can see a cast shadow under here. So I'm going to go ahead and add in that texture. The wood floor is a lot darker than the white carpet. So I'm going to go ahead and push it darker right here as it goes behind the table. And then I'm going to take some white and just mix it with the black paint that's in my brush already. And with some smaller marks, start to get that texture. Maybe clean up the edge of the tabletop. And there's a really dark areas underneath the pillows where they're casting shadows. But again, at this point, I'm using a smaller brush to get the detail. The purple pillow in between those two pillows. There's a pattern on this pillow. And there's some lighter marks as well. So again, I'm just painting wet into wet and translating the whole painting into grayscale. Some lines in the cloth, starting right there of the couch, and then it goes over the edge. And you can see some little wrinkles and such. And again, you're just kind of shoveling the paint on there. Now, as far as the brick pattern is concerned, I don't see every brick. So I'm going to start off with just some stray bricks here and there. I haven't decided whether I want to put that beetle poster in or not. Now, I do see more bricks at the corner here. And you'll notice that the bricks up here conform to that angle. As you move towards the middle, they conform to a horizontal, and then as they go down towards the bottom of the wall, you'll notice that they start to angle down a little bit. But for the most part, they're angling upward up here. And you can see that I'm just kind of creating a rhythm of texture. And I'm not being too finicky with it. Are you okay, Rebecca? Yeah. I'll lighten up that wall just a little bit. Just like all the paintings that we do, you're going to work back and forth between the various objects. Lighten up the top of this a little bit more. And I'm putting the paint on pretty thick. Nice yellow pillow over here. Top of an armrest there. Down there. Little table over in the corner. So again, just touching wet into wet. And, you know, the goal of this is to get pretty tight with everything. But at first, you're going to paint relatively loose. So I'm not so concerned with these being perfectly white or being the exact number at first. I'm just getting some of the light that's down there. So after that initial underdrawing, it is about opaque paint. But loose. All right, guys. So you can see how I'm moving. If everybody turns their attention to the board here, you can see how I'm moving towards more and more specificity as far as, you know, painting the reflections and getting more light on the carpet and working with the designs on the couch as far as the colors of the pillows are concerned. And when I say colors, I mean value colors. You know, I've got a general, you know, picket fence out here. I need to obviously work on this chair a little bit. But the basic forms are there. Kitty's not there yet, but he's going to be. And essentially what you see happening in here, which is much closer to what's happening in here, is kind of what we're shooting for over the weekend. Does that make sense? So just like our first project, a grayscale painting of our architectural interior is what we're looking for. Does that make sense? Does everybody understand that? It can be relatively loose, but still you want everything that's there as far as value is concerned. Obviously, I need to bring this table over some. It's a little small. So there's a lot of corrections yet for me to make, but you know, the essential values, colors, value colors, textures, etc. are there, and it's just a matter of finishing it. And we'll probably, you know, finish it up on Monday, because there'll probably be things that we all need to work on as far as the level of finish. Does that make sense? But, you know, really try to get it covered with opaque paint between now and Monday, so that it's just a matter of me helping you to resolve the errors and the issues that you have, like that. You know, perspectival issues, we can fix them. If there are value issues, we can fix them. Because what we really want to do is be able to go into Monday making those issues finalized and finished, if the contrast isn't enough, making it better, so that I can then demonstrate the color phase or the glazing phase. Is that clear to everybody? Okay, how about you guys on teams? Is that clear to you?